That little plastic bag of sand sitting inside a $10 kit at the toy store is hiding something that was alive before the first dinosaur ever walked the earth. And if you add water to it tonight, by tomorrow morning, you will have hundreds of tiny, three-eyed cannibals tearing each other apart at the bottom of your tank. Most people who buy one of these kits think they're getting a cute little science experiment. Something for the kids, something easy, and to be fair, the box makes it sound that way. Dinosaur eggs, ancient creatures, just add water. But what the marketing completely glosses over is that what you're actually hatching is one of the most ruthless, bizarre, and scientifically fascinating animals on the planet. And by the end of this video, you're going to see that little plastic bag in a completely different way. We're going to go through the real science of what Triops actually are, what they do to each other, and everything else in the tank. And the one thing about them that almost nobody talks about, something that genuinely shocked me when I found it. I'll get to that last one near the end, and I promise it's worth the wait. So first, let's get the basics right, because the marketing gets this slightly wrong in an interesting way. Triops have been present on Earth for over 220 million years, often referred to as living fossils, with a body plan that has remained virtually unchanged since the age of the dinosaurs. That is the part the box gets right. The part it gets wrong is more interesting. Scientists used to consider one Triops species, Triops cancriformis, as the same animal seen in 250 million-year-old fossils, meaning it had survived from the Triassic period when dinosaurs first emerged. However, a 2013 study found that the current species actually evolved within the last 25 million years, so the body plan is ancient. The exact species is newer. Think of it like this. The blueprint is older than dinosaurs, but the specific creature you're looking at is more like a very faithful copy of something impossibly old. The largely unchanged carapace outline, trunk limb structure, and telson morphology have been preserved across approximately 380 million years in the order Notostraca as a whole. The design is so good that evolution basically left it alone. And when something has survived that long, you have to ask, what is it doing that works so well? The answer is where it gets genuinely weird. Here is the second most surprising thing about Triops, and it is something you will notice in your tank within the first few days if you hatch one of these kits. These things are cannibals, and not in a passive, accidental way. It is built into their survival strategy at a fundamental level. In the temporary bodies of water where Triops live, time is short. The puddles often dry up after a few weeks, and in that short time, the animals must grow, mate, and lay eggs. Those that grow faster have a better chance of reproducing, and those that eat other Triops simply grow faster. So cannibalism is not a malfunction. It is the whole point. The bigger you are, the more eggs you produce, the more likely your bloodline survives the next dry season. Eating your siblings is not a bug. It is a feature that has been refined over hundreds of millions of years. Triops are also curious and territorial. They constantly explore their surroundings with their antennae and react to movement. If a smaller or weaker Triops moves nearby, it can immediately trigger the hunting instinct of the larger one. So it is not even always about hunger. Sometimes a smaller Triops just moves at the wrong moment, and that is it. Game over. This is exactly why, when you hatch a kit and start with what looks like a thriving cloud of tiny creatures, within a week, you might be down to just a handful of dominant individuals. The tank does not just thin out, it gets sorted, fast. And here is what makes this even more unsettling. The cannibalism does not stop at live animals. Research published in the Journal of Plankton Research looked specifically at what Triops do when they are foraging through the sediment at the bottom of a tank or pond. The study evaluated predation by Triops cancriformis on dormant eggs buried in sediment, including Daphnia eggs and Triops dormant eggs in an act of cannibalism. Significant predation was recorded on both dormant stages, with no apparent selection. These results indicate that Triops could eradicate the dormant eggs in surface sediments entirely. Read that again. They dig through the sand and eat the sleeping eggs of their own species. The next generation, just sitting there dormant in the substrate, and the adults will chew right through them. That is not just predatory behavior. That is a creature actively erasing its own future competition while it forages. And yet, and this is the part that genuinely blew my mind, the eggs have a defense mechanism against exactly this. Research indicates that conspecific cues also have the power to terminate the diapause of Triops' resting eggs. In other words, the dormant eggs in the sediment can chemically sense when adult Triops are nearby. The hatching rate increases with increasing concentration of conspecific cues in the water. So, when the water above them fills up with chemical signals from adults, more eggs hatch at once, flooding the water column with tiny new hatchlings all at the same time, which reduces the chance that any single one of them gets picked off by a large adult patrolling the bottom. The eggs are not just waiting, they are listening, and they are making a calculated decision about when to hatch based on how dangerous the world above them currently is. That is happening right now in your little plastic tank on the kitchen counter, and the box does not mention any of it. Now, before I get to the wildest thing about Triops, the one I mentioned at the start that almost nobody talks about, I want to take a second here because I genuinely appreciate you watching this far. Growing a channel that actually digs into the science behind aquarium life, rather than just the surface level stuff, takes real time and effort. And if you have been here watching, commenting, and sharing these videos, that means everything. YouTube does not make it easy for smaller channels to get seen by other aquarium and fish tank enthusiasts, so every comment and every share genuinely helps. I put a lot of work into making sure what I cover is actually accurate and interesting, and I thank all of you who support that. And right now, to celebrate hitting 1,000 subscribers, I am giving away Amazon gift cards worth $100. The way it works is simple. Subscribe, leave a comment on this video, and share it. Once we hit that milestone, I will randomly select a winner and announce it right here on the channel. So if you have not subscribed yet, now is a genuinely good time. All right, back to the Triops, because we need to talk about what these things do to an entire ecosystem, not just to each other. When Triops hatch into a temporary pond or a freshwater tank, they do not just participate in the ecosystem, they restructure it. As they feed and burrow on the bottom, they stir up mud and muddy the entire water column. You will see this in your own tank. The water goes murky almost immediately after they start moving, and that cloudiness is not a problem with your setup. That is Triops doing what Triops do. They are essentially bulldozing the substrate constantly, and everything else in the water has to adapt around that. The scale of their dominance in natural ponds is actually staggering. In some Mediterranean temporary ponds, Triops Cancriformis alone can make up around 90% of the predator biomass. One species. 9 out of every 10 predators in the entire pond. And other animals in that water have evolved specific responses to Triops being around. Research on Daphnia, those tiny water fleas you might recognize from aquarium stores, found that when Daphnia detect Triops-specific chemical cues in the water, they grow a special bulkier body shape, physically making themselves harder for Triops to handle and swallow. The prey is literally reshaping its own body in real time because of the threat. That is how dominant Triops are in their environment. Other species have evolved entire morphological responses just to survive sharing water with them. Triops achieve their incredible spread by laying resting eggs with a special structure that protects the interior from extreme temperatures, drought, and radiation. These cysts allow Triops to move into new territory by hitching a ride with migrating birds and in the feet and droppings of animals that pick them up from puddles and pools. So, a Triops population can establish itself in a brand new pond without any Triops ever swimming there. The eggs just arrive, dry, dormant, and waiting. In Triops Cancriformis specifically, a dormancy period of 27 years in the field has been documented. 27 years, dry, sitting in cracked mud, and then it rains, and they hatch. Tests on the International Space Station have proven this hardiness, and those findings led to a NASA high school experiment that sent Triops longicaudatus back to the ISS to test whether it could be grown in space and serve as a high-protein food source for astronauts on future long-term missions. The creature in your $10 kit has been to space. Now here is the thing I promised at the beginning, the thing that almost nobody who buys one of these kits ever finds out. And it has nothing to do with how they look, or how they hatch, or how they eat each other. It has to do with how they reproduce. And it is one of the rarest biological strategies known to science. In some populations of Triops cancriformis, samples collected in the wild were almost entirely female, with only one male found among 400 specimens. Observation of sperm among follicle ducts of a few samples indicated some degree of hermaphroditism, but the animals appeared to reproduce mainly through parthenogenesis. So, in many populations, there are almost no males at all. The females reproduce by themselves, but it goes even further than that. European Triops cancriformis populations show one of the rarest reproductive systems known in the animal kingdom, androdioece, where self-fertilizing hermaphrodites coexist with occasional males, alongside populations that can switch between different reproductive modes entirely. The striking morphological similarity of some Upper Triassic Triops fossils to extant Triops cancriformis makes this Notostraca one of the best examples of morphological stasis and living fossils, and the possibility of hermaphrodite reproduction could account for the wide distribution of Triops cancriformis. The ability to reproduce without a mate means a single egg, carried on a bird's foot, landing in a new pond, can start an entire population. No partner needed. One egg, one animal, one new colony. And because of that, while the external form remains conserved, the genus has undergone cryptic genetic diversification and multiple radiations, debunking the notion of Triops as the oldest living species, and instead positioning it as a highly stable lineage. The body has not changed, but the genetics underneath have kept quietly evolving, adapting, diversifying in ways you cannot see just by looking at them. Which is exactly why scientists are now doing something remarkable with Triops conservation. Triops cancriformis is classified as endangered in the UK, with colonies found alive in nature reserves. So, the same animal sold in toy stores worldwide as a disposable novelty pet is simultaneously a protected endangered species in parts of Europe. Conservation biologists are now surveying for Triops populations by extracting DNA directly from individual resting eggs in dried sediment, finding what researchers call ghost populations, where no living adult has been seen for years, but viable eggs are still buried in the mud, ready to resurrect the entire population the moment conditions line up. The animal is endangered and nearly invisible, and the only way to know it is even there is to read its DNA from a sleeping egg in dry dirt. That is the real story inside the $10 kit, not a cute science project. A 220-million-year-old design that survived ice ages, mass extinctions, and droughts that killed almost everything else, by building eggs that can listen for danger, by being willing to eat their own future offspring, by learning to reproduce without a partner, and by spreading themselves across the planet on the feet of birds. Cannibalism among Triops is a survival mechanism that has proven itself over hundreds of millions of years. And the whole thing fits inside a bag of sand you can buy for $10. If you set one of these up and watched what happened in your own tank, drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know how many survived the first week, because based on everything we just covered, the answer is probably fewer than you expected. And now you know exactly why. And if you want to see what happens when you try to raise 1 million of these things at once, the chaos that follows is something else entirely.